There's a lot of talk in the appraisal space right now about appraisal modernization. And there are some opinions about appraisal modernization out there. Is the world going to be taken over by ChatGPT? Are AVMs going to be the way of the future? Our guest today has some thoughts on these topics, and I'm excited to hear what he has to say. Stick around after the break, and we'll talk with Paul Chandler about appraisal modernization, AVMs, and ChatGPT.
ACI introduces ACI Sky Workbench, a cutting-edge cloud-based platform designed to streamline UR/AR appraisal report generation like never before. With seamless workflow integration, automated data management, and built-in compliance, Workbench empowers appraisers to work smarter, faster, and with greater accuracy. Visit aciweb.com for more info. You're listening to the Appraisal Buzzcast with your host, Hal Humphreys.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you again for joining us for today's Appraisal Buzzcast. Let me bring back our host, Hal Humphreys. Hey, Hal, how are you doing?
Jim Morrison, I am doing fantastic today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Well, we are very excited to have somebody to talk on this AVM process. We have not had Paul Chandler on a Buzzcast before, and I am so excited to have Paul Chandler from Property Sciences back. Let me bring him in. Hey, Paul.
Hi, Jim. Hal, how you guys doing?
Doing fantastic.
Paul has always been a strong advocate for keeping appraisers in the valuation process. And this year, he's not only serving as the president of the North California chapter of the Appraisal Institute, but he's also on the Industry Advisory Council for the Appraisal Foundation. So I'll let you guys get started.
Paul, it seems like Jim Morrison is trying to switch you to a different coast, but you are president of the Northern California Appraisal Institute chapter. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be here. For the listeners out there that don't know who Paul Chandler is, if you don't mind, give us a brief history of your background in this appraisal space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say thank you, Jim and Hal, for having me. I took a look at some of the Buzzcasts before, today, and I just want to say what a great job you guys are doing getting the information out to everybody. So I appreciate you having me here this morning. My background is, while I was going to school as an undergrad, I got my real estate license and took a job working part-time while I was going to school with a bank consulting company. And that bank consulting company, my role was a site locator, helping banks and S&Ls find locations and negotiate for those sites. And then also part of my job was helping write the applications that were required when a bank wanted to open a branch. They would have to file a needs statement with the regulators. And much of the data in those reports are data that an appraiser might look at. A lot of market studies on supply and demand in the marketplace. After I graduated, I stayed with that company for a couple of years, and then went to work for one of our clients, a small savings and loan in San Francisco, as a VP of real estate, and a young guy with a heady title, quite an intoxicating position, being a young guy, doing new loan originations, servicing, and ultimately mostly workouts. We were getting close to the 86 Tax Act and the beginning of the savings and loan crisis. And so I got kind of a firsthand view of some troubled loans. And while I was reviewing those troubled loans and trying to help work those out, I read a lot of appraisal reports. And I realized that there were a lot of overly optimistic assumptions and projections in those appraisal reports. Related to absorption and sales and that sort of thing. And I realized that there was a need to help these financial institutions make loans on new projects for construction. So I started Property Sciences to do that, to do market studies and financial feasibility for financial institutions. And I did that for, several months, and things were moving along. And then, one of our clients had completed both the market study and the financial feasibility study. And they said, "Can you do an appraisal?" And I said, "Well, I've read some before. I've seen some. I have some copies of appraisals here in my work files. I can do one for you." Now, you remember this is what year 84, 85, no licensing required yet.
Right.
And I was able to hang a shingle and start doing commercial appraisal reports. And that quickly grew into the largest portion of our business, more appraisals than market studies and financial feasibility. And then fast forward like maybe another year, and one of our retail shopping center developers who wanted to get a loan on his high-end home, take some money out and buy another shopping center, asked if I could do a single family appraisal because he had gotten a quote of like 5 weeks for a single family appraisal. This is for some of the appraisers out there. You may remember those times in 85, 86. And I said, "Well, if you get me a form, I can complete it." As a servicing manager at the Savings and Loan, I read a lot of appraisal reports. I can do one for you. And so we did that. Couple of days, we got it back to the bank, and lo and behold, that bank called us and said, "Can you do some more appraisals at faster than 5 to 6 weeks?" And so we started adding some folks. And so ever since that period of time, Property Sciences has been both a single family and a commercial appraisal company. I decided in 1987 that I was going to go back to grad school. And I thought, if I'm going to be signing lots of reports, it'd be great to have a PhD after my name. And so I applied back to Berkeley, and they redirected me to the master's program. And so I started the MBA program at Cal in 1987. And I still had property sciences. I had some great people here and some mentors who helped me keep things going while I went to school. And I studied a fair amount, studied automated valuation models while I was there. And I studied econometrics. Both my undergrad and my grad are in real estate and finance from Berkeley. And, they have a great faculty there, and I was fortunate to be able to work with them, throughout my time there. And on my AVM project with my econometrics professor, lucky me, he was sharing an office with probably, if not the top academic in the country at the time on AVM, certainly one of a short list of academics. So then I graduated. I stayed at the MBA program, decided not to pursue my PhD. I came back and started running Property Sciences. We entered into a partnership with a couple of the Berkeley professors to build an AVM back in that day. And we built it, and we got it tested by several of the large stakeholders who told us that our model was one of the top performing models that they had reviewed. And we felt pretty good about that. And then we started negotiating data contracts. And I realized that the data industry had become quite consolidated. There were only really a couple of data providers at the time. And I made probably one of many bad decisions that I've made throughout my career. I decided that there wasn't really any money in the algorithms. The money was really in the data, and that the data companies would keep raising prices to make most of the profit, and the algorithms wouldn't make that much money. What I didn't realize as a young man is that you can make a lot of money selling snake oil over time, and many have in that space. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about AVMs as we go forward. But ever since that period of time, Property Sciences has been a commercial and residential appraisal company. Of course, we became an AMC following Dodd-Frank. We had many appraisers and independent contractors at our company, and just by the nature of the numbers and what we were doing, we had to get licensed, and so today we are an appraisal company and an appraisal management company.
Paul, that is quite a history in this industry. The ability to think of valuation, and I'm just, don't let me put words in your mouth, but I'm just going to say this out loud because I think this is important. The ability to think about real estate appraisal, valuation in the theoretical sense allows one to appraise commercial and appraise residential and consider automated valuation models and those kind of things. So I think that's one of the things that I would like to see more of in the residential appraisal space, is the ability to think about this business in the theoretical. What creates value in a real estate scenario? And I think for you, coming from a feasibility, a market study background is what gives you that theoretical basis. Does that sound right?
I think that's fair, right? I mean, the value of things matter, and the value of things are, a function of what you can do with them, how you can use them, what it costs to improve them.
Yeah.
There's a lot of discussion now in our industry. I'm sure you're hearing some of this about, we need better highest and best use training of appraisers, particularly now with the upzoning issues that we're hearing in, California, Washington, and some other states. Being able to keep our appraisal community educated on how to do that instead of deciding we're going to pass and we can't do, if not us, who? We have to do it. We have to make sure that our members and our profession have the correct education. And so,
yeah.
In the two organizations that I'm working on, those are a big part of what we talk about, is how do we continue to help educate our members on the important topics facing us.
Yeah, and this is a good segue into, you were president of the Northern California Appraisal Institute. You're chair of the Industry Advisory Council of the Appraisal Foundation. What are you most focused on this year for appraisers?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, at the Appraisal Institute, it's about coming together in unity. There have been ongoing issues, not just in our profession, but, society in general. There's so many ways that we're being pulled apart, and that's true in our own profession. And just trying to remind our members that, what we do is incredibly important. This is an honorable profession that I can't imagine a world where we don't have appraisers. I know there are many that would like to imagine a world where, we're using fiat value derived by an automated valuation model that's not that good, and that's not a path that is long sustainable for society. The appraisal profession is important. If not us, then it's going to go back to. I'm assuming the lenders will control everything again. And as we know, 100 years, Congress has highlighted through a series of crises that come and go that lenders can be predatory by nature. They can take advantage of people. And there needs to be somebody looking and signing reports. Let's call it a fairness advisor, if you will, but somebody who's looking at the transaction and saying that it's okay. It's maybe not perfect. This number might not, there's always some subjectiveness in the valuation process, as objective and scientific as we can try to make it, but that it's fair. And I'm willing to put my name in this file that it's fair, as a check on the lenders who we know historically are, and it's getting worse, as you know, meaning that, with the securitization industry the way it is now in the residential market, the lenders and securitizers sell all the risk. And so they don't have homeowners' best interests at stake, and there needs to be somebody. And so I'm very honored to be a an appraiser at this point in time and try to raise the flag for public trust.
Yeah, I think that's key. And at the end of the day, Paul, people out there in the world buying real estate, there are still buyers, people that are participating in the market that want to have an independent third party come in and say, hey, here's what this thing is worth today, to get a better sense of feeling for what they're about to do. The thing I like about feasibility study is almost always done prior to a decision being made. And it seems like, especially in the residential space, the appraisal is ordered as a last minute, oh, shoot, we got to get an appraisal in this file. And the decision's already been made. And it's hard to, it's difficult for appraisers to come in that situation and say, hey, hang on a second, because they've already made up their mind. I like the notion of appraisers being thought of as the independent third party to come in and say, hey, this works, or maybe this doesn't work, or you're in the ballpark. I mean, those are valuable things for investors, for lenders to consider. The other thing that you mentioned, we talked about appraisal, automated valuation systems, those kind of things. There's a lot of talk right now in the appraisal space about appraisal modernization. And I've been accused of throwing air quotes up every time I say appraisal modernization.
I've used a few of those myself, by the way.
I am not a Luddite. I like technology. I think technology is a tool that we can use. But where do you see appraisal modernization going for appraisers?
Well, I'm I've been referred to as a buggy whip manufacturer more than once, trying to defend the appraisal profession. So modernization, at its core is using automated valuation models to make decisions. Either that or they just use the borrower's estimate of the value along with their tools that they have. So I think you mentioned that, as chair of the Industry Advisory Council this year and have been on the Industry Advisory Council for many years, I chaired a task force on the current generation of AVMs. And if I could back up just a minute and tell you how I got that position, it's a bit insightful. So I want to say it was February 2020. Just before COVID broke, because we convened this task force and did most of the early work during the first year of lockdown. And at this meeting at the Industry Advisory Council, we had one of the nation's leading experts on automated valuation models come speak to us. And I knew that she was coming to speak to us. She was a leading expert. She worked for one of the large data companies that I referred to have, control a lot of the data. And they also sell a lot of the AVM products. And I had seen different presentations by, the same slide decks used at other presentations. I'd been hearing these stories for quite some time. And every chance I would get, I would stand up and say, algorithms are dangerous for homeowners. No one would listen. So she made her presentation and she started and she had a graph that I'd seen many times. And let's see if I can get the arms correct for the viewers, but all right sloping and up. Big data, artificial intelligence, they're getting much better. And I held up my hand and I asked a question. I said, can I ask a question? You say they're getting much better. Do you have any mathematical evidence to prove this? And she looked at me, she paused, she looked around the room, and then she goes, I don't understand your question. I smiled a bit, as you can imagine, and I looked around the room a bit to see how everybody else was responding to not understanding a basic question. And I said, well, let me phrase it in a different way. You also mentioned that forecast standard deviations are getting much better. And until most recently, that was the primary statistical tool that AVM developers were using to determine their accuracy. And I said, you said that that's getting much better. Do you have any mathematical evidence for that? Same, I don't really, it didn't have an answer for me. She paused. Some of the other members around the room, many of which are active selling these models, tried to help her out. There was maybe a dialogue for about 5 minutes. And then she proceeded to say thank you and was ready to go forward with her presentation. And I said, just before you start again, let me just make sure that after hearing everybody in this room talk, am I clear that not a single person in this room has any mathematical evidence that the models are actually getting better? There was one person that tried to continue to argue. I won't go into the details of that with you, but basically at the end of that meeting, the Industry Advisory Council decided to start an AVM task force, and they looked at me and said, we're going to appoint you chair, and I became the task force chair. And so what we learned over the 2-year effort, it took quite some time to, as you can imagine, getting the industry stakeholders together and getting them to agree on anything and signing a paper, and then having the IAC council have to approve that paper. Not an easy process. It kind of reminds me of, when, your boss used to tell you, don't bring me problems without a solution. Well, all I was doing was complaining about the problems. I didn't really have a solution. All I knew was that they weren't very good, and our paper says that. If you take out all the discussions about the future of AI and big data and artificial intelligence, how that is the future of everything, but when you read it, there are so many fundamental flaws with real estate data, and this might not be the place for that, but I would encourage anyone who is interested in this topic. The paper is at the Appraisal Foundation Industry Advisory Council section. You can download that paper and read it.
Interesting. I'm hearing you tell that story and how you got voluntold to head the committee. I'm reminded of there's an opening sequence in the movie Apocalypse Now where Martin Sheen says, I wanted a mission, and for my sins, they gave me one.
Be careful what you ask for.
Be careful what you ask for. Well, Paul, let me do this. I'm going to take a real quick break, and we're going to hear from one of our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Are you ready to take your career in real estate appraisal to the next level? Join the Appraisal Institute, your go-to source for expert insights, industry trends, and the latest updates from the world of valuation. Whether you're an experienced appraiser or just starting out, they bring you industry resources, classes, and all the knowledge you need to stay ahead. Join today and be part of a community that's shaping the future of the appraisal profession. Visit appraisalinstitute.org to learn more and become a member.
Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to the Appraisal Buzzcast. I'm your host, Hal Humphreys. I'm joined today by Paul Chandler. Paul, thank you so much again for taking the time to be here with us today. I've thoroughly enjoyed the chat. I do want to cover one more thing. There's a lot of buzz out there in the world about artificial intelligence in our industry specific, but in general, there's a lot of chatter about artificial intelligence. You've mentioned the term in the past, AI hype. What do you mean by that? And what is the need for speed we keep hearing about? This is a battle between man versus machine. Let's talk about AI for a little bit.
Yeah, so when I was on the AVM task force, what I used to like to remind people is that, in the 1960s with a Cray computer, which, I never actually saw one, but I've heard many stories of them taking up, small warehouses themselves. And the professor that I mentioned that, helped me with my AVMs, we would talk about this where, they would have access to great data sets. There had been a previous financial crisis, and the agencies, I think Freddie Mac gave data sets and let them run them through the Cray computers and model the data. And so today we have a computer at our hands that is much faster than a Cray computer, and there's much more data. But the all we now are able to do is get the decision faster at our hand. That is not very good. And the fundamental features of an automated valuation model that have any statistical relevance haven't really changed in 50 years. And if you talk privately to the largest AVM developers, which I had an opportunity to do over a 2-year period, it confirmed my understanding that, there's really just a couple of features. So the square foot of the house, the square foot of the lot, the age, the sale price and the sale date, right? And then, of course, the location. But if you don't really have good locational data, you don't really have anything. And so those 6 things haven't really changed. And most of the models are driven off of those. And so for 50 years, that hasn't really changed. Yet there's still a lot of, hype about modernization. There's a lot of hype about AI in general. So artificial intelligence, lots of different definitions. I've had, so many cocktails with different CTO buddies of mine, and they're all can convince me that they can explain to me the difference today. And then, usually after my eyes glaze over, I don't really feel like there's much difference, meaning that big data computers have been around. Yes, there's more data. Yes, the computers are faster. When we were on the AVM task force, we asked all the stakeholders because, they would talk about, well, machine learning is, computers are now learning on their own. And we said, can anyone show us any machine learning lift on the models? And no one was able to do that. What we're learning is that you can use machine learning, study various patterns and diagrams, et cetera, which machine learning is great for. And then that informs you how you can modify your models. But in the AVM space, they're not being modified off of those big 5 statistics, which brings us back to the modernization and the data collection and the hybrid process of they're collecting all of this additional data. And I understand there's going to be a report coming out. I went to a government relations committee up in Sacramento, and one of the Appraisal Institute guys was there and said they heard that a report's coming out. Maybe it's already come out, where they're going to argue, the GSEs are going to argue that these inspectors are getting much better at data collection than the appraisers are, and therefore appraisers aren't as valuable. And I ask, well, they're good at collecting a bunch of data, but does that data have any relevance to the value of the property? And so there's still a question there as to why all this data is being collected, why they're arguing that it's informing models when they're not able to show any proof that these models are getting any better, even though they're collecting more data. And so, when I say AI hype, I mean, I think everybody feels it. You turn on the TV and everything is AI. And my recommendation for most people is just turn the TV off. I mean, the TV is really only designed to scare us. It's now, such a small group of companies that are owning and controlling the TV. You should be suspicious. I tell them, if you ever hear a word on TV and it's repeated, and within 3 months, it'd be every street corner, food truck vendor knows that word, you better be careful. There's something being sold that is probably not in your best interest.
The funny thing is, I heard, and this is kind of a twofold statement. Number one of my favorite comedians is Jimmy Carr. He's a British comedian. If you're a listener out there and you go Google Jimmy Carr, be ready. There's some foul language involved in his comedy sets. But somebody asked him about artificial intelligence, and his response was really the best I've seen so far, which is AI is a cover band at best. it's going to regurgitate stuff that it knows because it doesn't create new knowledge. It's taking stuff that is fed. So there is a hint of garbage in, garbage out that is built into the notion of artificial intelligence. The other thing is in this world of big data sets, and I understand that property data collectors are gathering, a number of data points based on the new UAD. And I don't think more data is necessarily a bad thing. I think more data is usually a good thing. But how do we deal with that data? And we've got, Paul, at Val Expo coming up in August this year, we have a keynote speaker by the name of Tricia Wang. And if you've never heard Tricia Wang speak, check out her TED Talk. If you just Google Tricia Wang TED Talk Nokia, you'll find a really interesting talk that she gives about big data and the fact that it is a tool that is useful, but without what she calls thick data. And in her instance, she's talking about cultural anthropologists getting actual information from populations where they're living and behaving and doing their things. That role sounds an awful lot like a real estate appraiser in Humboldt, Tennessee. The guy who's in the market, knows realtors, knows what's going on, studies that local market on the granular level. Big data is great. It's a useful tool. But without the thick data to inform what we do with those tools, I think it could be really problematic.
Yeah, I concur with you. And I always like to, you remember, I can't remember which vendor it was. They had an ad for the easy button, right? The red easy button. And, in every financial transaction, somebody's got to hit the go button.
Yeah.
And how is that go button determined? Is it all a bunch of data? Again, we know the models don't work that great, and the models aren't going to work great anytime soon because of the fundamental flaws of the real estate data. So we're left with an automated decision model. And certainly for American homeowners on their most important asset, doesn't seem like a great plan. And back to this need for speed, right? So everybody's talking about, well, it's going to be so much faster. How fast does an American homeowner need to make, which is likely to be one of the most important decisions they make in their life related to buying a home or borrowing against that home? Other countries that have studied this have given waiting periods, meaning that, we're not going to let somebody get on their telephone and secure their house because it's easy and they were drinking or desperate at the time and got taken advantage of by some predatory lender. And we have to protect against that. You think about, our society and civilization and our government. I mean, if we really care about our society and our civilization, what can we do to protect them? And protecting their home and their most important asset throughout their life. We can't do that. What are we doing?
Yeah. And, thinking through what you just said, like I'm a real estate appraiser by trade. My father was a real estate appraiser. I came into this business the old fashioned way. It's really, I've had some side careers along the way, but they've all been informed by real estate valuation as a career. And I know real estate pretty well. The last house I bought for personal use, I bought 25 years ago. And it was when my wife and I decided we wanted to live in this one area of Nashville. And it took us 6 months to find the house we wanted to buy. And then it took us a little bit longer to go through the process of getting a loan. And I was not personally offended by that. It made sense to me. But I'm also, maybe I'm a Luddite. I came to the table with some money down. I didn't want to pay mortgage insurance, so I came with enough money to bring that down, number one. And number two, we looked at it in terms of This is our primary asset. I hired my own appraiser outside of the bank's appraisal because I wanted to make sure I wasn't making a really stupid decision. Again, I think you're right. This is the most expensive, largest investment for most people out there. And I don't personally think it's something that you should be able to do, pick up the phone, call what is the equivalent of a rideshare app and get a home mortgage like that. I think it's too much money to play that fast and loose with. Anyway, Paul, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to be with us. I've enjoyed this chat a great deal. Jim Morrison does this thing to me, Paul, where he asks an anonymous appraiser question. I think he does it just to trip me up. Now, I don't know if he has an anonymous appraiser question for us today. Jim, do you?
Well, we usually do, but unfortunately you guys ran past the buzzer. So you you went past the time, so you guys are off the hook on an anonymous appraiser. But if anyone has any anonymous appraiser questions for us, reach out to us at comments@appraisalbuzz.com, and we'll get it on our next episode.
Awesome. I'm so glad we ran the clock out on that. I love answering the anonymous appraiser questions.
To a question. So I can stick around if you need me, but
we'll get to it next time. Paul, again, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Jim Morrison, if we have nothing else, for Jim Morrison and Paul Chandler, I'm Hal Humphreys, and that is your Appraisal Buzzcast for this week.